redundancy is very important in this world. While we do the scaling, we always need to have a redundancy. I think that's the point. Each and every component that we build, we need to have a redundancy created, right? So automation on top of this, right? I think it will take further, right? If we can have a systems where we do the monitoring proactively, which is automated, and if we have rules to auto heal the systems, right? So I think that's going to really be the future, I would say, right? So
my thought is that while we continue scaling up systems, growing it bigger and bigger, the workarounds which are beyond systems also should not be lost. I think there is still an element of 0.001% where a system can fail, but there has to be workarounds which can really help run the scalable systems, because the impact is, manifold and, it is kind of catastrophic. Scalable and resilient go very, very strongly together, because the moment you start scaling up, the demands on its resilience also increases it to that level.
Consistency is very, very critical. It's like saying on a human body, how much can you put that sort of a consistent pressure and how much can you sustain it? And if the systems can sustain and continuously basically handle this kind of a load, that's where we talk about scalability coming in, because that is the purpose of any kind of a system, technically speaking. So payment, again, from a scale point of view, it's not about just having one silo out there. It is the complete and end-to-end cycle which you need to look at, right from the beginning of the transaction to the close of the transaction, which includes your beginning of, let's say, checkout experience to finally authorization to finally getting a final thing from the customer, from the banks and everything, the debits from the customer. So every system in the leg has to play its role.
I think the resilience and the scalability, security is another aspect where we need to see, and the confidence that we need to build on to the customers. How reliable is the system that we are introducing for making the payments? So the decline, it's not only about the transaction per se, but also reconciling and settling, making the settlements to the customers. So these are the challenges, in terms of technical declines.
Interesting topic. Technology innovations for scalable payments processing. Yeah. First thing, maybe we'll start off with what do we actually define as scalable payment processing, right? Maybe each one of us will have a different thought about what do we mean by scale here, right? So maybe to start off with, I just wanted to open up to the panels just to share your perspectives on what do you think from your perspective is the scalable payment processing.
Yeah, so I think I had a different preparation for this session, but I thought it is relevant and a bit cliched also, but to talk about yesterday's outage, which kind of will segue us into what my thoughts are. So as it would be, I was in Delhi last 2 days and I had a flight to come back yesterday at 8 o'clock in the night to Mumbai. And luckily for me, and I'm happy to call out the airline, so I was flying Air India, so there was no impact. In fact, my flight came ahead of time. So that's the benefit I got for whatever reason, just sheer luck. But I think one thing I saw, and it was a bit of a difficult state of affairs at the airport, especially chaotic people trying to reach home. People back from holidays having weekends to go to their houses or whatever. But one thing which I saw, and I will call out these examples and relate further. So moment I reached the airport, DigiYatra was not working. Okay, so that was the first impact I felt over there. But there was a security guard, of course, quite hassled, but I could give him my details and I was inside the airport, so that helped. Second is, I heard, and I did not, I had a pre-check-in, so it didn't matter, but I heard people getting manual boarding passes, handwritten, and there was a lot of viral pictures moving around, which was there. So check-in, yeah, not electronic, but still happened. Then I came in and the displays at the airport were all blanked out, showing the blue screen of death. But I saw, and I think there's a picture in Times of India today also of that, a very well, shabbily written white colored board where flight gate numbers were published. Okay. Then I saw a video of BBC in terms of what was happening, and UK probably had a big impact on health services. My presumption is that all prescriptions are electronic. Doctors reverted to manual handwritten. So it worked fine. Okay. So take this now next step to what we are doing in the industry. What is the backup for UPI IMPS if it goes down? I think the answer is nothing. Okay, so for whatever reason, doesn't matter what cause it is, but there are situations in real life where there are manual workarounds which help, but on fast payments like UPI, which kind of, I don't know, I may be wrong, but 90-95% of the payments in India are done through that. There's no backup available. In the good old days, in cards, you used to have those embossing machines also, which used to be there. But I think today we don't have much of a backup. The question comes now is that how scalable, and from scalable we need to move to resilient, how strong we build these payment systems which will have these all outages, but the impact is minimal to the respective community which is using it. So I think that's my thought, is that while we continue scaling up systems, growing it bigger and bigger, the workarounds which are beyond systems also should not be lost. I think there is still an element of 0.001% where a system can fail, but there has to be workarounds which can really help run the scalable systems, because the impact is manifold and it is kind of catastrophic in most cases like this. So my honest thought, based on the last 24-hour experience and even the past experience, is that I think scalable and resilient go very, very strongly together, because the moment you start scaling up, the demands on its resilience also increases it to that level.
I'll bring a different perspective to the whole thing. I think we've seen, again, going back again to a last panel, Naushad did speak about cricket being our favorite sport, right? So again, drawing an analogy to that, just a few days back, we had one of the best bowlers, fast bowlers, who had basically retired from international cricket, James Henderson. So I don't know how many of you have heard of James Henderson, but that person had been playing for close to about 21 years, and he had taken 704 wickets. Now, effectively, if you look at any fast bowler, what is the lifeline of a fast bowler? Bowling at a consistent speed of about 135 plus for so many years. Now, we look at some sort of a bowler, the lifeline of a fast bowler is not beyond 8 to 10 years. They're plagued by multiple injuries out there, which means I'll bring back that analogy into systems also. And at the same time, in terms of performance and consistency, because going about the resilience and consistency in performance, which is very, very critical over a period of time. So it's not something which is a small period of time. And same thing when we look at, for our homegrown Sachin Tendulkar, he survived in cricket for 29 years almost. He started at the age of 14. He retired finally from cricket at the age of 43. When you look at from international cricket, he was almost there for almost about 25 odd years. Consistently performing at the best levels for 25 long years, and that takes a toll, and that takes basically the consistency is very, very critical. And at that performance, so it's not about basically just about doing, okay, fine, we bring up scale, bring up resilience, then basically you need to show that consistency in performance is going to be critical. And coming back to the modern times and coming back to actual systems, I think all due credit you should be giving to NPCI, Visas, masters of this world right now. Now look at the number of transactions that are being managed by each of these networks. When you look at this, and this is not something which are basically for a small period of time, of course, they're able to scale up, but they're able to manage and ensure that there is a definitely almost near zero kind of downtime, but they're consistently being there. It's like saying on a human body, how much can you put that sort of a consistent pressure, and how much can you sustain it? And if the systems can sustain and continuously basically handle this kind of a load, that's where we talk about scalability coming in, because that is the purpose of any kind of a system, technically speaking. Now, when you look at a payment system specifically here, so I had again going back to the 2005 example, I had got stuck in the floods out here in Mumbai, and thankfully all the payment system had got stuck. We used to run an exchange. So at that time I was basically driving and creating software for the financial markets, and because of flooding in our the DB sets, the exchange had to go down, but finally we managed to get it started out, and then we left out with our colleagues outside. There's nobody accepting anything other than basically cash out there. Thankfully, there was this Orchid Hotel which had these old zigzag machines, and they were able to accept the cards and do a settlement subsequently. Those sort of scenarios, I think, because see, you have always a manual workarounds available, but given the current scale and things, I don't think you'll be able to get into manual workarounds there. So one, again, the most important point I'm trying to drive here is basically in terms of consistency, along with the scale and resilience, the consistency of a system to be able to manage that kind of a throughput is going to be very, very critical. And that throughput is keeping on increasing. For example, we've seen something like Big Billion Days about a few years back. So this is my past avatar where I was heading a company called Atom, which is a digital payments company, and of course Flipkart also was a part of our customer for some other things. But I had a chat with somebody from Visa out there, and Flipkart had moved from using an existing payment gateway. They had to move to the CyberSource pipe out there, simply because the existing payment gateway pipes, even the Flipkart basic media systems were able to handle the load and everything else, the payment systems had collapsed. They're simply not able to manage the payment, and for them to be able to do that. So payment, again, from a scale point of view, it's not about just having one silo out there. It is the complete and the end-to-end cycle which you need to look at, right from the beginning of the transaction to the close of the transaction, which includes your beginning of, let's say, checkout experience to finally authorization to finally getting a thing from the customer, from the banks and everything, the debits from the customer. So every system in the leg has to play its role. For example, you may have the best payment system out there, but on an issuer host, if your issuer host is not able to take that basically scale, it's not able to scale up to the kind of things coming into it, it will collapse in which ways. Which is, say, its consistency along with the entire network effect, which is going to be very critical in terms of managing a very highly scalable payment system. So that's just a limited viewpoint.
Just to add the points which I think the resilience and the scalability, security is another aspect where we need to see, and the confidence that we need to build on to the customers. How reliable is the system that we are introducing for making the payments? I think recently with the RBI Innovation Hub, we associated with one fintech and launched an app called NapID, where your mobile app is put to sleep and which prevents from hacking. So this is one of the recent innovations that we did. We are the first one to launch this NapID solution to the customers. So this is something, another key area where we need to provide to the customers and build confidence so that they don't lose money, or they are free to use the payment systems. So apart from, there are a lot of initiatives NPCI is making, and maybe I would like to list out some of the initiatives which we did with NPCI, which is to penetrate the digital payments in the rural areas by using the feature phones called UPI 123. So again, we want to get the opportunity to launch it first to make the UPI in the rural areas, and in enhancing that, we introduced the voice-based UPI payment with the same platform. And now we are going to use the embedded payment, which is going to be launched soon in the next GFF coming next month. So maybe we will be able to know that more when it is actually launched.
Now, there are various dimensions. So then we need to talk about each of these dimensions, right? So when we talk about scale. So what I'm going to do is next section, a quick fire. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to compare two of the dimensions and probably give some insights about those dimensions, right? So which involves scale. Maybe I'll start off with you, Yusuf. So you spoke about resiliency, right? So if I have to talk about the networks, right, the centralized versus decentralized systems, right? What is your view, and do you think one or the other would be able to accelerate the scaling that we want to do, right? If you can probably brief along those lines, please.
Yeah, so I think pure play, if you look at payment services, they will be centralized because eventually somebody has to control it at a central level, like an NPCI or an IDRBT or an RBI, to kind of, regulate the payment to move through point A to point B, or bank A to bank B, or wherever it goes. So that's the traditional model we are working in. The CBDC is kind of, I don't know if people understand the architecture, is kind of more federated architecture which is there, so that removes that centralization dependency, but it's still a distance away for it to be a real consumer based payment system. So I think then this dilemma has always been there, and for people like me who's been kind of ages in technology, you always have this concept of client-server networking versus peer-to-peer networking, which is better. Each one has got its own pros and cons which are available. But I think my honest understanding is the solution lies somewhere in the middle, where one should be able to have multiple modes available with so maybe a UPI 1 and a UPI 2 run by two different organizations, okay, is probably an example, may or may not happen, and each organization having two pipes, one to A and one to B, and then if one goes down, the other one can pick up. But the whole dilemma here is that to what extent one can build an N+N capability. And again, I'll refer back to yesterday's example. How much of it can banks and organizations afford to build that capability? Now, if you see yesterday's example, at least my understanding so far, so I may be wrong, this is what I've heard. So the issue was that a security tool running on Windows machine called CrowdStrike, which had an update which went into, and that update messed up all the Windows devices in the industry. That was the simple issue which was there. So if the device is with you at your house, in your office, there's an engineer who can look at it, go and fix it. Now the situation moves to the cloud. When it's on a cloud, it depends on how strong your cloud recovery processes are. So because you cannot go to a device to fix it. So it depends on your backup, how you go and do that. But the question is, the logical point, people will come and say, okay, fine, you have it Microsoft Azure. Can you also have a backup on AWS? Can you have a backup on Oracle? So that's one way. Second way comes in, it affected all Windows machines. So can you have multiple OSs of a product running? Somewhere it's on Windows, somewhere it's Linux, somewhere it's something else. How deep can you go? Now the tool affected was a security tool. So can you have multiple flavors of security tools running so it can never affect you? And it's never ending. You will probably reach a situation that you are running most of your stuff on Intel CPUs. Can you use AMD or can you use M2 as a backup? Because the CPU can also become a problem. Or even to that extent that if you have a USB port, there's a standard which is running and that has a problem. So can you have USB A and USB C, or you can... So the challenge eventually is that, how much of redundancy one can build up and how pragmatic it is to build it up to run in a setup and at what cost. So and that's my point, that you probably have to take it to a next level, but not take it to an extreme where you start doubling everything which is there in your environment. Otherwise it's a never ending cost story which will come in.
Yeah, good points, right? So redundancy is very important in this world. While we do the scaling, we always need to have a redundancy. I think that's the point. Each and every component that we build, we need to have a redundancy created, right? So very valid points. Again, the UPI example you touched upon, right? One such thing, at least we are trying to create redundancy, is having an active kind of a setup, right? So again, each component try to always have some redundancy created, right? So maybe I'll pick two other dimensions to use, Devang. If I have to take monitoring versus troubleshooting, right, in a scalable payment processing, what do you think we should be doing?
See, I think there was a concept of systems which has developed over a period of time called zero downtime. The whole idea being zero downtime and zero administration. Both of them are, I think, critical concepts which came around maybe about late 2010s or the early 2010s kind of area out there. In a complex world, for example, look at a payment system. Like for example, when you look at someone like a Visa system, which is operating globally at a global scale, there cannot be any downtime in the system, technically speaking. Even if they are coming out with any patch updates or anything else, you theoretically cannot have any kind of downtime. Same thing with any kind of airline reservation systems. For example, you have various abacus and various airline reservation systems, because that impacts the whole world in its whole, globally it will start impacting. When you start building on those sort of systems out there, effectively you're trying to bring down from a troubleshooting mode into you get into monitoring, because then you're putting checks and balances. For example, the whole concept of network operating center, like for example, when we used to operate exchanges, even in, for example, our POS terminals in Atom, we would have basically what we call as a network operating center. So we would know essentially basically through heartbeats whether particular machines were up or not basically up out there. So monitoring became a key part of the whole thing versus troubleshooting out there. Troubleshooting is basically kind of cause and reaction, cause and effect kind of a thing. If there is a particular node or certain things that is going down out there, then effectively you get into troubleshooting that part of the node, and then you know what needs to be done to fix that, versus basically impacting the entire system, because your proactive monitoring is going to be the most crucial component in ensuring the health of the entire payment system. And you need to have the bells and whistles out there, because along with basically I would say you could use your sound or any other kind of things to ensure that people are alerted on the right time if there is something going wrong somewhere across the network. Now, for example, going back to yesterday's example, one of the key things which the issues are occurring more compared to the old time when you had basically on-prem kind of solutions to basically moving on to the cloud, was deployments are there in the cloud right now which are applicable to everybody else. The earlier times where people are deploying software, the whole approach was isolate that, test it out, and make sure that basically even any patch comes in from Windows or any other operating systems, make sure that patch is tested before you are actually putting that into production for your production system. So none of the production systems would go down ever. Now there is this basically cloud deployment where you're centrally being deployed, and suddenly the whole system starts collapsing out there. So again, bringing back to the same point, monitoring versus troubleshooting, I would say monitoring is the most critical aspect of the whole things. With isolation of basically whenever you have pain points, go into those troubleshooting points and then start troubleshooting areas around there.
Yeah, thank you. I think monitoring, troubleshooting, maybe I'll just add a bit more on this now. So automation on top of this, right? I think it will take further, right? If we can have a systems where we do the monitoring proactively, which is automated, and if we have rules to auto heal the systems, right? I think that's going to really be the future, I would say, right? So another two dimensions, if I have to talk about high availability versus being secure, how do you want to compare those?
High availability is something like, in fact, many are defined as high available now. So being in multiple, connections with the PSPs, with NPCI, with other banks, other institutions, I think everybody defines their own availability, perspective, and that becomes a very, challenging situation. It may be, due to many aspects like the maintenance, especially each one has to do their own maintenance, their own patch managements. So nobody knows what will happen to at the end of the person who is handling the particular transaction part. So due to that, a lot of declines are happening, and security aspects again the firewall rule changes. There are many aspects to it by which declines are happening. So it's about managing well the end-to-end the systems well.
Yeah, I think while we are talking about scaling, security is one of the core aspect that we need to take into consideration. Again, there are instances that happened, like yesterday's example. The security patch itself created a problem for the systems, right? So we got to be really cautious about balancing this out and take it into consideration. Devang, so if you can talk a bit about what do you think about application versus infrastructure, right? And scaling it, how do we want to give considerations to balance between application and infrastructure?
I think it's. I think if you look at it, it's like a chicken and egg situation, because if there are no application, infra can't. There's no point on having an infra in place. If there is no infra, the applications can't run on top of it. But having said that, basically very critical. Again, I just go back to alluding to what Yusuf had mentioned about part back. There's a question of over-engineering at points of time, right? When you start building up the infra, idea is to, for example, the best advantage of a cloud now, it gives you on-demand scalability, auto-scaling, and a whole lot of other functionality out there. And consume as you basically, as you want to, like, you build as much as you want to consume, kind of a thing. That philosophy is coming. So I think that infra setup has relieved a lot of, I'm sure, a lot of CIOs and everybody else from the rigmarole of basically creating a monolithic infrastructure earlier on. So in the earlier days when, for example, we had to create an exchange infra or maybe even a payment infra, we had moved everything onto the cloud subsequently down the line, but even on like stock exchange trading and other infra, the whole issue was about creating and using fault-tolerant systems. You had the right kind of load balancers out there to basically ensuring that you had the right RAM, everything else, processing capabilities and everything, because you don't know when the spikes could occur out there. And that was the biggest challenge, very critically in terms of basically your infra play out there. Now, having said that, when you create and when you have the baseline infra being set out there, idea is to create applications that can use the infrastructure maximally. So again, going back to the old days, there was a time when your resources were scarce. So you would basically talk about optimizing for your CPU, your disk space, your memory and everything else. Now nobody cares about those. People, when they design applications, they really don't care about that. They say, okay, this is assumed is going to be there. But I would rather say it's not the case, because again, whatever said and done, your resources have a cost. Everything has a cost. Your infrastructure has a cost to it. So whenever people or application designers, when they're designing applications, they need to make sure that they're designing keeping in mind the current infra in mind. At the same time, while keeping in mind, basically you talk about redundancy also. For example, there are cases in Viewpoint out there. Do you want to be, let's say, if you understand a lot of tech out there, so do you want to be cloud native? When I talk about cloud native, do you design exclusively for using Amazon as basically, or AWS as a platform out there, which means tomorrow you will not be able to have a parallel infra or a kind of a DR which could run on Azure or any other cloud environment, versus basically saying, okay, fine, we want to create which on generic tools right now, any kind of app on generic tools which can basically allow us redundancy to operate across multiple cloud environment. Because given the current, just about a few months back, or maybe about a year and a half back, we'd seen one of the data centers of AWS also had gone down. So I think that had impacted a lot of players out there, right? And if people had and assuming that if there is the company-wide basically failure in terms of, let's say, AWS, the infra fails across the Indian environment, you don't have any other backup. So ideal is, when you look at redundancy being there, idea is to plan for redundancy also. So you design for basically the infra, you design for redundancy out there, make sure basically you're designing for the future. Again, second is making sure that you're making certain amount of future proofing your architecture out there. So I think a whole lot of things goes around into designing. So that's where the play on infra and applications is.
Sure, thank you. Just to add to that, right? So again, while there needs to be a right balance between application and infra, at least in the current scenario, we need to design the applications to be horizontally scalable, right? So that, as you rightly said, we need to take care of the infra cost in mind, but at the same time, it should be horizontally scalable, so that when the volume goes up, we'll be able to take care of handling the volume as well. Yeah. Maybe Venkat, I'll come to you. If you have to take the dimensions of scaling or increasing the throughput versus the favorite one, technical declines, how do you want to compare?
That's the toughest, part for any banker. So with the scale of multiple sources, especially now, UPI being the main killer, I think, and a lot of complaints you get across social media, various other, and regulator as well. So you are tightened from all the corners, ensure that you make it available, whatever difficulties that we face. So there are many aspects. Again, as I said before, there are multiple players when we make the payments. Especially the toughest period will be March for any banker, when we support the tax payments, the GST, income tax. So everybody is on call, supporting the customers, to make the payment successful. So it's a real big challenge for the bankers. And secondly, as he said, scalability on the infra part. So again, this is another unpredictable area where you can't count the UPI. You can't plan anything for making your infra. This is going to be my scale, and this is what I need to be providing for the infrastructure part. So this is another part. Then the major part which I can say is the challenge would be your reconciliation, because with multiple sources that you get the files from NPCI, from your switch. So there also I think we need to ensure that we are able to reconcile all the three sides of the transactions. So the decline, it's not only about the transaction per se, but also reconciling and settling, making the settlements to the customers. So these are the challenges, in terms of technical declines.
Yeah, agree. Reconciliation is one of the key things that we need to address along with the technical declines as well. Yeah. Moving on, probably the last set I have, maybe to Yusuf, new product launch or adoption versus preventing fraud, right? So how do we have the right balance? Your views,
no,
please.
I think it's a very logical answer. I think fraud prevention will take priority. I think you cannot keep on launching products which are prone to fraud. So you'll have to build that robust, supply chain line, which kind of ensures that, of course, you cannot have 100% fraud proof, but you can minimize the frauds which are happening, and there are various ways and tools of doing it now. But I think still, as an industry, we are way behind. I think it's but somewhere I'd heard that the fraud numbers in India compared to the volumes is lower. It's not at the topmost in the world, at least that I understand. But it is a challenge, from a perspective, and the ecosystem is much wider for a fraud. So while the effect of the fraud is on the banking system, in most cases the origination is the mobile phone. In most cases. So there is a proliferation of fraudsters who have easy access to mobile SIMs, who are kind of picking up vulnerable people on telephone calls to give OTPs or do a screen share or whatever, and they continue doing things. The effect is on the banking system effectively. So that is where it is, and I think new products launches are probably more sensitized these days, to be like, when you develop a product, you have already secure by design. We are building it from an IT perspective. So they are fraud resilient by design also from the start. That's how we are building it up.
Sure. Thank you. Maybe with that, I'll stop comparing the dimensions now. We'll get into one open round discussion wherein what kind of innovations or solutions that are there, and what is the future facing technology advancements that we are envisioning, right? So for handling these parameters that we discuss about, right? So we'll probably go one round on this.
In my view, I think AI and RPA are the two dimensions which I can say will be helpful in terms of innovations. Especially AI will definitely help, especially we having a lot of data on the payments being made digitally. So that will enable banks to have the data with them, use it for cross-selling, use it for customer acquisitions. So it's getting wider in terms of identifying your potential customers. So digital payments makes room for further customer acquisitions. This is one area. Then other one is the RBA, where as I said, I was thrusting on the recon bot, where it is becoming a challenge, especially with multiple forms of UPI. So what we did is we leveraged the RBA and we built a solution in-house where we pick the files automatically from multiple sources, consolidate it there, and then put it into the recon system, which actually had given a lot of relief to us while we were struggling, especially on the declines and the chargebacks and various settlements that banks need to make. So automation is something which really helps us in terms of handling this.
I think I would look at the nature of the customers changing right now. When you look at all systems or whatever people are going to design for the Gen Zs in place, because the generation has shifted right now. The Gen Z is mobile only. Gen Z is I think they need far more things compared to what typically our generation or just generation after us required systems around. So a couple of things that come into mind out there is basically, and again from the nature of the way businesses got shaped up. For example, banks have gone back to the role of being banks only out there, traditionally bank and other fintechs. So all services, other tech part, banks are working and partnering with fintechs to offer those services. So you'll have a lot of loosely structured federated partnerships out there where all the information may not be residing on the bank server, systems and data is going to be segregated across the whole places out there. In such an environment, there are a couple of things that come into mind. One, basically, of course, what Venkat spoke about earlier in terms of AI and other things is definitely going to be there. But I feel there are two areas. One is basically in terms of how can you use generative AI. Basically, I think that's definitely going to be in the cards in terms of giving a natural language based answers to the customer, because customer facing is going to be critical out there. And today, for example, there are so many banks competing for the same set of customers out. You look at the friction points, even for example, you're just opening up a bank account or something else, there's so much amount of friction in terms of opening the bank accounts or any kind of things that people are doing. The Gen Z doesn't have the patience to wait for it. So how do we give those systems using maybe using some sort of a Gen AI kind and using large language models to offer and provide those systems is going to be very important. Second is to operate those large language models, what you're going to be requiring over a period of time is a huge amount of computing power. So you're going to move on to basically two things. One, basically for security, you're going to look at, because security and fraud patterns are changing right now, you would need to get into something like a quantum computing, which is able to detect and give you those results in microseconds. Your ability to react is going to be more important than basically and predict is going to be more important, and speed is going to be most relevant out there. And that's where quantum computing is going to come in there. Second, of course, in terms of running this large language model, because the amount of data is so humongous right now, your traditional computing power is not going to be able to manage that. In the next few years, maybe 3 years or 5 years down the line, you're going to see that shift happening in terms of people moving from or the large computing intensive tasks being moved to some sort of a quantum computing kind of environment out there. So there's a couple of things I would like to add on.
No, so I have a bit of a conservative view on this, and I think probably I'll try to relate it a bit better. So I think whilst technology is the key to get all of these working and all the points we discussed, I think the biggest factor will be process, and I think even the larger factor will be people who run this. I think that's the most important aspect which is there. If you have very strong and robust processes defined as a payment service provider, whether it's a bank or a fintech or it's a central agency like NPCI, then you will be able to deliver the service. Technology will always fail. I think let's take it. It will always fail. But it's the processes around that and how you recover from it which will help you, bring the service up as quickly as possible. And I am taking a chaos situation like the one happened yesterday. I think and probably it's too early to say now, but my guess is that organizations which would have considered a situation. So typically, when you look at an IT perspective, you look at your BCP and your DR plans, The DR plan might be that the production site has gone down and you brought up the DR site and you're up and running. But organizations which have thought that if I lose this server, and how fast am I able to go to the previous image, backup image I have got, and I'm able to recover it, because here a DR production would have been in the same situation, are the ones which would have really be able to recover quickly. That's a guess, okay? But that's my thought, that the process is the most important over here, which will help you recover. People is very important. I think today, and probably most of us will relate to this, is that getting the people with that right mindset who can think the worst case scenario, and help you develop it, build it up is required. And it also goes back to the whole, colleges, educational systems, how we are developing. So I believe today we've got few institutions offering a diploma or a master's in banking technology. I think it is probably needs to go to an even more specialized level where somebody is a postgrad or a master's or whatever in payments technology, because it is now evolving to a level where, again, it's a guess, 80-85% of our life with a bank is on payments. So even if you see your mobile app usage, well, it's got the super apps and everything kind of coming in, but most people will use it on some PSP app to make a payment from person A to person B. So the people processes are very important in this, and they need to be groomed and developed for a longer term, I think.
Sure. I think if there are technology people here, you'd be loving to hear this, right? So we always have this battle going on, right? So everything technology should provide a solution is what people will expect. But as Yusuf said, there are scenarios where technology can fail, and we need to have the process and people to cover it up as well. So well said, sir. So just to sum it up, I think the points that came out is, yeah, people, process are important, and technology perspective, I think there are a lot of innovations that are coming up. I think we touched upon the artificial intelligence, and then we touched upon generative AIs. Again, one point I just wanted to add on Gen AI, right? So computing power is one of the critical thing that's going to be happening. And we already started talking about GPUs than CPUs, right? So the computing power is going to be really, really increasing. Quantum computing is another thing that's coming up. Again, just to give an example on that, the security aspect, right? So if the public key, private key kind of a thing, and encryption, the random number generation. So that is really going up with introduction of quantum computing, right? I think if quantum computing comes up, anybody will be able to break the private keys with given a public key kind of, right? So we'll have to keep evolving on the technology side to handle the scale with secure as well. Yeah. So these are all the points came up. Just from my perspective, wanted to add, right? While scaling is, we need to always think about scaling, right? One thing we always discuss in our organizations, how do we talk about scale, or how do we talk about increasing the scale, right? We always take the analogy of a farm versus forest, right? If you want to really scale fast, do you want to go down the controlled farming route, or do you want to go down the forest route? Right? That's always a debate. In fact, we used to have within among ourselves, and there needs to be a middle ground, and we'll have to probably take that and move forward to scaling faster, but with the consideration of all the parameters that we have been discussing, right? That's my takeaway. I just noted those points from this discussion. Yeah. With that, thank you very much.